When a woman reaches an internal state where she no longer feels a need for others, the world around her begins to perceive her entirely differently. The urge to protect her dissipates, attempts to manipulate her cease, and she is no longer seen as either a fragile creature or an easily accessible person. On the contrary, she is perceived as a powerful, indomitable individual, someone exceedingly difficult to break, someone who stands confidently and unyieldingly on her own 2 feet. This profound internal transformation occurring within her consciousness and self-perception immediately and strikingly alters how others see her, how they relate to her, and, no less importantly, the image that remains in their memory. First and foremost, a woman who no longer seeks external approval begins to radiate a unique presence that cannot be imitated or faked. It is not merely an appearance, but an authentic, intangible energy that cannot be copied. It cannot be artificially created with skillful makeup, flattering words, or meticulously curated social media images. This special energy originates and manifests spontaneously in a completely natural way the moment a woman finally liberates herself from dependence on others' approval. When this pivotal moment arrives, absolutely everything about her transforms. Her posture changes, the timbre of her voice gains new depth, even her manner of moving, sitting, and entering any room shifts. She no longer needs to make any effort to attract attention, as her unseen yet powerful presence alone commands genuine respect and captivates gazes. Carl Jung, the eminent thinker, asserted that true metamorphosis occurs when an individual refuses to conform to the expectations of the external world and instead embraces their true essence. In women, this transformation primarily manifests through a shift in inner energy which ceases to actively seek attention. Such a woman no longer questions others' approval, does not seek a validating glance from outside, and no longer requires external reactions to feel complete. She has already chosen herself, acknowledged her worth, and affirmed her own existence. Once this internal acceptance happens, everything around her begins to change. These changes affect her manner of speaking, her ability to listen, and her skill in setting personal boundaries without feeling the need to justify herself. She gains the confidence to say no without the slightest tremor in her voice. But the most striking aspect is that her energy does not scream for attention. It is neither noisy nor intrusive. Instead, it radiates serenity, unwavering resolve, and a powerful magnetic allure, making this woman truly unforgettable. Around such a woman, fascinating social dynamics unfold. Some people begin to distance themselves as they lose the ability to control her, for she no longer reacts out of inner insecurity and does not live to please others' desires. Others experience noticeable discomfort, as they do not know how to interact with a person who no longer conforms to external frameworks, does not belittle herself for acceptance, and does not pretend to be weak to avoid disturbing anyone. Finally, there are those who feel genuine admiration, observing her with deep respect, for they sense that what she possesses cannot be bought with money or skillfully imitated. This quality is born from an inner fire, from experienced falls and complex, at times agonizing processes known only to her. It is this internal struggle, invisible to outsiders, that is the source of her incredible strength. The path to this state required repeated internal rebirth for this woman, passing through moments of profound crisis. She had to face the rejection of those around her who were unwilling to tolerate her uniqueness and distinctiveness. Each time she dared to set personal boundaries, she had to overcome agonizing stages of guilt imposed by societal expectations. Many nights she spent in silent tears when only a radiant smile was expected of her, yet each time she found the strength to move forward, choosing the path of recovery. It was in these moments of internal struggle that a deep truth was revealed to her. Her true worth is not determined by the degree of understanding or approval from others. It is rooted in unwavering fidelity to her own self. The turning point came when she finally shed the mask of pretense designed to ensure her conformity to others' expectations. Her soul had no more strength for false smiles that concealed inner pain. Gazing at her own reflection, she uttered decisive words. "Enough. My purpose is not to feign well-being." The next day, her actions and demeanor radically changed. She did not need to say a word. Her inner energy, her transformed state, spoke volumes, silently declaring the metamorphosis that had occurred. The renowned psychoanalyst Carl Jung asserted that authenticity embodies a unique, self-sufficient power. This statement is absolutely true, for a woman who no longer seeks external approval can disarm others without a single word, disrupt established relationship dynamics without raising her voice, and shift the atmosphere of a space with just her presence. Such a manifestation is not arrogance, it is a display of profound inner integrity, consistency, and unwavering commitment to herself. It is the natural outcome of countless instances where she consistently chose her own path, even when no one else was willing to support her in that choice. Perhaps the most powerful force in a person is the state when an individual stops competing with others. She no longer needs to strive for exclusivity or crave universal attention. She simply dwells in deep inner tranquility. It is this serenity, this unwavering inner strength that generates something fundamental and profound. People, encountering her, begin to perceive her entirely differently. Some feel insignificant next to her, as her reactions are no longer the same, her presence has become less tangible, and she no longer tries to please anyone. Such behavior often tears off many masks from those around her. Others, conversely, feel an irresistible attraction to her, as her sovereignty is perceived as something fresh, untainted, radiating vitality. She needs nothing, and it is this very lack of need that makes her magnetically appealing. However, the most significant aspect is not the external manifestation, but the profound processes occurring within her being. She rejects a life whose purpose was to be chosen and daily makes a conscious decision in favor of herself. She stops seeking justifications for her feelings and instead begins to honor what her inner intuition tells her. The fear of loneliness gives way to genuine enjoyment of her own company. This is truly invaluable, for a woman who has ceased to depend on others' approval gains authentic freedom. She becomes free from the burden of imposed connections, free from the weight of others' expectations, free from the exhausting need to explain herself every few minutes, free from a burden that essentially does not belong to her. This freedom comes with a certain price. She no longer fits into any conventional molds. She does not accept indifferent relationships, nor does she tolerate empty, meaningless dialogues. She rejects manipulations cleverly disguised as sincere affection, for her vision is now clear, and though this feeling sometimes causes isolation, she realizes it is an integral part of the becoming process. The true price of freedom is merely temporary discomfort from falling out of the pattern of superficial connections, but this is of no consequence. The reason is simple. She no longer wishes to belong to anything that forced her to betray her true essence. From now on, she belongs only to herself. It is this circumstance that makes her unlike others. For when a woman stops needing others' approval, her capacity to love is not diminished. On the contrary, it becomes more authentic and genuine, and this is what the world often finds itself powerless to handle. Secondly, on that momentous day when a woman stops begging for favor, others begin to perceive her in an entirely new light. In every woman's life there comes a moment when something inside her breaks, and it is not her heart, but her profound need for external validation. This happens on the day when, looking in the mirror with weary eyes and a fractured soul, she says to herself, "Enough. I will no longer beg for affection, attention, presence, or even crumbs of love." And on this day, even if she doesn't immediately realize it, her inner energy undergoes a radical transformation. It is as if something sacred awakens within her, as if that part of her soul that was dormant, content with little, made excuses for everything, and remained silent out of fear, rises up and proclaims, "I was not born to humbly beg for affection, My destiny is to receive it from genuine sincerity. The renowned psychoanalyst Carl Jung asserted that what one stubbornly turns away from and denies within oneself ultimately gains power over them. Thus, as long as a woman rejects her deep-seated need for authentic affection, for sincere and trusting relationships, for full reciprocity, she involuntarily inclines towards accepting almost any form of communication simply to avoid loneliness. In this pursuit of compromise, many women lose their true path. She gradually becomes accustomed to being offered only crumbs of attention, to her messages being answered only when convenient, to love being expressed only halfway, and to dialogue beginning only at another's whim. She becomes accustomed to people disappearing from her life precisely when their support is most needed. And she accepted all this because a deep emotional wound made her firmly believe that even such a minimum was better than complete absence. However, no one explained to her that each time she accepted these meager offerings, she eroded her inner energy, her self-esteem relentlessly cracked, and her intuition went astray. A moment arrives when it becomes impossible to distinguish what she is experiencing, true love or merely emotional dependency, cleverly disguised as coexistence. And then, one day, weariness sets in, not from others, but from herself. From how day after day she betrays her own interests, trying to hold on to what is inherently impossible to hold. From the agonizing feeling of precious moments of life slipping through her fingers in an endless wait for change from another person. From the need to pretend everything is fine, while internally she is shattered into tiny fragments. And then comes the final decision. No more unread messages, no more draining connections, no more presence that is truly an absence, no more indifferent affection. On that very day, unbeknownst to herself, her inner vibration significantly rises, her energy field clears of all unnecessary baggage, her personal presence becomes more tangible and firm, and everyone around her begins to perceive her entirely differently. People accustomed to someone's instant availability inevitably experience deep confusion. She no longer responds with former promptness, doesn't display excessive dependency, doesn't yield to every provocation, because now she doesn't beg, but consciously chooses. When a woman begins to act based on her own choice, instead of begging for attention or love, her inner energy gains genuine invulnerability. She no longer needs to receive external messages to feel her own significance. She stops waiting for phone calls as undeniable proof of affection. Moreover, she no longer conflates anxiety with romantic feelings. The reason is that she now possesses something she previously lacked: emotional dignity. This does not mean she has become indifferent or cold. On the contrary, it signifies that she now recognizes her own worth and therefore accepts nothing less than what she deserves. And although at first this state may be perceived as a kind of inner void, as she had grown accustomed to giving herself away completely, adapting to circumstances, patiently waiting to eventually be appreciated, this gaping void gradually begins to fill. It fills with herself, her authentic voice, her inner peace, her newly found power, her self-care. Carl Jung spoke of the archetype of the inner mother. This is the aspect of the personality that provides care, nourishment, and inner containment, but directed inward. And when an individual awakens this powerful energy within themselves, they cease seeking this energy externally. They no longer need someone to come to their aid and save them, because they are already capable of sustaining themselves, and this inner energy becomes evident to those around them. Others begin to perceive an individual differently when their personal boundaries become clear, their gaze gains confidence, and their silence ceases to be a sign of timidity, transforming into a conscious choice. Such changes cause discomfort for those accustomed to this person's previous vulnerability, as they lose the ability to freely enter and leave her life at will. They no longer encounter a woman desperately seeking attention, but a mature, inwardly connected, and awakened individual. And the most powerful truth in all of this is that this transformed woman is none other than herself. There is no need to become a different entity. She only needs to cease the systematic self-betrayal that occurs whenever someone is unable or unwilling to love her properly. The moment she stops begging for affection and approval, her inner energy stops resonating with a sense of deficit and lack. It is then that all subsequent events and relationships take on a completely different quality. They become more sincere, profound, and truly resonant with her inner essence. For when a person makes themselves their own emotional priority, the world around them begins to treat them as someone undeniably worthy of respect and recognition. Thus, if one ever mistakenly believed that the need for affection was a sign of weakness, this was a misconception. The true problem lies not in having the need itself, but in denying oneself the satisfaction of one's own needs and desires solely to avoid loneliness or maintain someone's presence. This is genuine self-abnegation, a deep and destructive form of self-betrayal, and such self-betrayal must never be repeated in her life. The third aspect: a person is never alone, they are always in the company of themselves. This speaks to emotional independence and its profound psychological impact. Deeply rooted in the minds of many women is a pernicious illusion. If I leave my familiar circle, I will be utterly alone. If I dare to prioritize myself, no one will choose me. If I stop being convenient and compliant, I will lose everything. And it is this lie that has given rise to generations of women who, empty within, were outwardly surrounded. They were among people who completely misunderstood them, engaged in connections that brought no benefit, only consumed their energy. Their relationships offered only a semblance of presence but no inner peace. However, a moment arrives, not always predictable, but inevitably felt. It is like an internal click, a quiet awakening of consciousness, a truth that can no longer be ignored. One grows tired of being in company yet feeling profoundly alone, for it is one thing to experience external, physical loneliness, and quite another to endure an internal spiritual emptiness. One can have a partner, loyal friends, a loving family, yet still feel disconnected from their own essence. To feel that no one truly sees you, that your voice holds no weight, that your emotions are unimportant, that what you need always remains secondary. And it is then that an understanding emerges that flips the entire worldview. It is not about the number of people present, but the depth of connection with oneself. Carl Jung, a prominent thinker in depth psychology, paid particular attention to the phenomenon of inner disunity. He asserted that one of the fundamental evils of the modern world is the alienation of an individual from their own self. Such internal division inevitably gives rise to a range of negative states: anxiety, constant unease, and even depersonalization. In such a state, an individual may feel a deep emptiness without knowing its true causes. They may react with outbursts of anger, whose source remains a mystery to them. A person experiencing such disunity often exhibits dependency, self-doubt, or, conversely, an excessive need for control. All these manifestations are explained by futile attempts to externally compensate for what can only be healed from within. It is at this moment that true emotional independence emerges. However, it is important to understand that this state does not mean becoming a cold and detached person, nor does it imply being closed off to love or arrogantly asserting that no one is needed. On the contrary, its essence is quite the opposite. True emotional independence is expressed in the inner declaration: "Today I am here with myself, and that is enough for me to be whole." As soon as an individual achieves this profound realization, radical changes occur in their psyche. The nervous system gradually calms, the decisions they make become significantly clearer, and their relationships with others naturally purify. The body no longer remains constantly tense, trying to please external expectations. The mind is freed from dependence on others' opinions and approval. The soul finally ceases to silently grieve from feeling abandoned, because now the individual is in harmony with themselves. And this transformation, though seemingly subtle at first glance, is in essence a true revolution in a person's life. Undoubtedly, it is often the case that when a person embarks on this transformative process, they encounter a profound sense of solitude as they initially discover an internal void. The realization comes: many of those who were present in their life gained access only because they unconsciously allowed them to, failing to set proper boundaries, being so far down their own priority list that virtually any external influence could take precedence. However, as soon as the individual places themselves at the epicenter of their being, this inner space gradually purifies, and then although the number of external connections may decrease, inner peace increases. Despite the growth of external silence, inner truth becomes clearer. And although the initial stage may be painful, this state ultimately brings healing, for a person is not alone. They find themselves, and for the first time, that is enough. The great thinker Carl Jung asserted that the human soul needs solitude to find its voice. It is then, when an individual finally ceases the futile external search, that they begin to truly hear themselves and recognize all those aspects they previously stubbornly ignored. This includes their authentic desires, their true inner voice, their actual boundaries, and their genuine energy. From this momentous turning point, their entire life undergoes cardinal changes, because now the person makes their choices not from a sense of acute need or lack, but from a state of inner abundance, from firmly acquired emotional stability, and a deep understanding that they are capable of being alone without feeling depleted. And this fundamental discovery changes absolutely everything. Because a woman who dares to be in full harmony with herself no longer settles for casual connections merely to avoid the oppressive feeling of loneliness. She stops seeking partnerships as a way to silence inner emptiness. Such a woman will no longer tolerate what brings no true benefit, guided by the dubious principle of something is better than nothing. She stops sacrificing her inner peace for the illusion of company, for now she herself is a complete companion, her soul has found its home, and her energy is now impervious to destructive chaos. This is where the greatest power lies. When an individual reaches such a level of deep connection with their own essence, they begin to attract into their life only what resonates with their inner vibration, and this happens not by magic, but through inner alignment. For a healed soul no longer seeks to repeat relationships based on old wounds. Its true desire is to build connections from a state of inner wholeness. Thus, emotional independence serves as the threshold separating a version of oneself merely surviving in the world from one that truly thrives. Consequently, if a woman is experiencing a period of inner emptiness, if she has consciously distanced herself from those who brought nothing beneficial into her life and feels an oppressive silence surrounding her, it should be understood. This is not a fall, but rather a return to herself. And when this process of returning to her true essence is complete, she will realize that she was never truly alone. She was simply cut off from the only being capable of saving her, herself. The fourth aspect. A person who no longer needs ceases to be an object of manipulation, and this radically transforms all their relationships. There is an unspoken truth rarely mentioned when someone embarks on a path of healing. Such a person ceases to be convenient or useful to many around them. For a woman who no longer experiences need becomes invulnerable to manipulation. This causes irritation, discomfort, and confusion in others, not due to her selfishness, but because she no longer conforms to the role that was assigned or imposed upon her by others. Is it known how many relationships are built solely on someone's need, be it a need for love, for validation, for presence, or for company? In return, the person unquestioningly gave everything, their precious time, vital energy, boundless patience, their own voice, and at times, even peace of mind. However, when an individual begins to deepen their self-knowledge, self-sustain their essence, and find inner peace, this all-consuming need gradually dissolves, and with it disappears the emotional dependency that forced them to endure unbearable circumstances. The eminent psychoanalyst Carl Jung discussed how the unconscious can hold people captive in certain dynamics or behavioral patterns that they unconsciously repeat, and often such emotional enslavement is cleverly disguised as love, but this is not true love. It is rather a strong attachment fueled by fear, or a deep emotional dependence based on the principle of at least he gives something. This is where manipulation takes root. When a person is in need, another instinctively senses it. Perhaps they do not articulate it or harbor malicious intent, but they feel this vulnerability and actively exploit it. The manipulator arbitrarily regulates their presence, appearing at will, disappearing when uncomfortable. They dispense only crumbs of attention, then express indignation if the victim demands more. He makes her feel guilty for setting boundaries, delivers cutting remarks disguised as advice, forces her into silence, and then accuses her of exaggeration. What does the victim do? She endures, remains silent, tries to explain herself, and apologizes for her emotions. Deep down, she is convinced that without this other person, her wholeness is compromised and something vital is missing. But when this vicious cycle is broken, when the belief "I need you" transforms into a firm "I have myself," everything fundamentally changes. The individual can no longer be manipulated through absence. They stop succumbing to emotional blackmail and no longer perceive silence as punishment. This happens because the person realizes that their inner peace and balance depend on no one else. It is this realization that radically transforms all their relationships. When profound changes occur in an individual's life, those whose presence in their environment was entirely predicated on the ability to control and manipulate begin to gradually distance themselves. Their departure is not a result of direct expulsion. Rather, they voluntarily withdraw from the interaction because they no longer find the former compliant, accommodating, and always ready for boundless self-sacrifice version of the person. However, those who remain undergo their own internal restructuring. They begin to show genuine respect for the individual's personal boundaries, listen carefully to their opinions, and recognize them as a truly significant figure. The reason for this transformation lies in the fact that the individual now gives their life energy not out of fear of separation or loss, but purely out of conscious, free choice. This is the fundamental difference. When a person is driven by acute need, they are often forced to tolerate unfavorable circumstances. But when they make a choice, they are guided by awareness, and making decisions from a position of inner strength represents a qualitatively different, higher vibration of being. Their external appearance also changes. Body language becomes more confident and open. Their manner of speech becomes measured and thoughtful, and words are no longer dictated by a desire to please or gain approval. Silence, previously perhaps filled with excuses, can now make others uncomfortable, as the person no longer feels the need to explain or justify themselves. This fundamentally changes the emotional dynamic of their entire environment, as the individual stops participating in old, manipulative games and ceases chasing anyone's attention or validation. They no longer allow others' emotional outbursts to draw them into their vortex. Instead, they are in a state of deep inner focus, from which they calmly observe the factors that previously completely controlled their behavior. In this new, clear state of being, they clearly distinguish attempts at manipulation, recognize the desire to induce guilt, see the falseness of empty apologies, and realize the lifelessness of unfulfilled promises. And, most importantly, they now know exactly when to unhesitatingly disengage from a situation without the slightest regret, because they are no longer bound by the mistaken belief that they absolutely need someone else to feel complete. A woman no longer trades her inner peace for anyone's presence. She stops giving her affection as an emotional concession or an unspoken bribe. From now on, her giving stems from the true abundance of her soul, not from a sense of deficit or lack. Such a profound transformation fundamentally changes her entire life. As the distinguished thinker Carl Jung asserted, a person's true strength lies in the ability to acknowledge their shadow side, integrate it into their personality, and, most importantly, not allow it to take over. Among women, one of the most common shadow aspects is a deeply rooted fear of being alone. It is this fear that often compels her to agree to any, sometimes even undesirable relationships, just to have someone by her side. However, when she dares to face this fear and overcome it, she comes to the realization that the only unbreakable relationships that cannot be lost are those she builds with herself. Once this inner connection becomes healthy, strong, and crystal clear, she stops accepting relationships where she is treated as easily replaceable. This happens because she understands her true worth, and finally begins to act in full accordance with this profound knowledge. Thus, a woman who no longer has an acute need for external validation ceases to be vulnerable to manipulation. This deep transformation radically changes her entire world. She begins to attract new circumstances and people, make decisions on a fundamentally different basis, expresses love in a completely different way, and, most importantly, her relationship with herself takes on a healthy and harmonious dimension. When a woman reaches a state of inner independence and stops experiencing acute need, her choice stems from a deep calling of her soul, which makes her a truly unforgettable figure. The moment the need for anything recedes, she gains true freedom of choice. And when she makes this choice, her motives come from a realm that remains unfathomable to many. Her soul is no longer guided by fear, does not act out of inertia of habit, and does not seek to avoid loneliness at any cost. Now her decisions are based on a genuine recognition of her own worth, on profound truth, on the inner peace she has painstakingly earned. This is not the result of empty self-suggestion, but the fruit of deep internal processes that have taught her to be alone with herself without the slightest self-deception. And although this change may be invisible to the outside world, it transforms her entire being. As Carl Jung asserted, when the conscious I aligns with the self, life is filled with an entirely new meaning. It is precisely this fateful alignment that occurs with a woman who no longer experiences need. Her consciousness comes into full alignment with her profound essence. And from this new state, her energy is completely transformed. In the past, her decisions were often dictated by pain. She agreed to remain in relationships devoid of true nourishment, solely out of fear of an overwhelming emptiness. She preferred to settle for less, just to avoid losing the little she had. She chose to remain silent, fearing rejection. But now everything has changed. Now her choice is a pure echo of her soul's inner calling, free from old shackles. A person's inner world, their soul, does not accept being guided solely by principles of comfort or fleeting gain. On the contrary, it subtly distinguishes what radiates authentic energy, what can elevate the spirit and significantly expand the horizons of consciousness. Anything that doesn't harmonize with these inner guideposts, the soul simply releases without excessive emotion, without accumulating bitterness, and without needing lengthy explanations. She comes to a deep understanding. Not every phenomenon or person is destined to occupy a place in her transformed reality, because her existence no longer accepts superficial connections, toxic influences, manipulative behavior, or indifferent attitudes. It is in this fundamental transformation that the radical turning point in her being lies. A woman who is now guided solely by the calling of her authentic inner essence stops seeking alliances intended merely to fill some inner void. She no longer tolerates the presence of those who seek to dim her inner light, her unique individuality. She consciously does not linger in environments where pretense or constant masking is required, for from now on, her authentic truth becomes an inviolable sanctuary. This high level of energetic integrity, radiated by her, is palpable to those around her. It cannot be imitated, cannot be imposed by force, and certainly cannot be falsified. Those around her are often unable to verbalize this inexplicable feeling, but they intuitively grasp it. Such a woman radiates entirely different vibrations. There is something in her behavior and demeanor that commands deep respect, without resorting to displays of power or loud pronouncements. Her discerning gaze holds the ability to penetrate to the core of things without a hint of aggression. Her presence simultaneously serves as a source of inspiration for some and causes a degree of bewilderment for those who have not yet found strong inner footing or embarked on a path of self-discovery. The question arises, why does this happen? The reason is that such a woman no longer adapts to others' expectations, does not back down from her convictions out of inertia, and does not soften her statements to avoid potential discomfort for others. Such behavior seems destructive in a society accustomed to encouraging self-sacrifice from women, but which simultaneously fears the one who dares to prioritize her own interests. The world praises a woman who gives boundlessly of herself, yet condemns the one who confidently declares, "If it doesn't uplift me, I don't need it in my life." This is precisely the person the described woman becomes. She transforms into someone who no longer begs, expects leniency, or adjusts to circumstances or others' desires. Now she consciously makes choices, and does so with a striking inner peace that many only aspire to. Consequently, her presence becomes truly unforgettable, as she comes not from a state of deficit or need, but from genuine abundance. And everything that emanates from this source leaves a profound imprint, for it does not try to impose itself, make demands, or resort to manipulation. It simply radiates a special energy, and this vibration possesses truly transformative power. There is something special that happens to those who come into contact with such a woman's energetic field. They cannot forget her, because her giving stems not from a sense of lack or dependence, but from deep inner freedom. When she decides to leave something or someone, it is not due to arrogance or haughtiness, but because her true essence cannot reside where authenticity is absent. She makes her choices guided solely by her own intuition and her unbreakable connection to something far greater than the mundane. For this reason, she ceases to be available for deception, for half-hearted solutions, and for those who merely seek to absorb her life force without showing readiness for mutual support. This is her greatest strength. She doesn't need to be understood by others. It is enough for her to steadfastly follow her inner compass and remain true to herself. Because a woman who acts by the calling of her soul no longer seeks to meet others' expectations, stops seeking approval, and does not settle for what is meant for others. Now she independently decides what to give her attention to whom to open her heart, and to what to dedicate her time. This makes her attractive, unforgettable, authentic, and although this path may sometimes seem solitary, it never again feels empty, for she is not alone. She is filled with her own essence, full of truth, driven by a high purpose, inspired, and this feeling is truly priceless. In conclusion, for a woman who has decided to stop experiencing need, the opportunity opens up to become someone no one will forget. She reached this stage because she already felt an inner calling, because she knew that something within her was ready for a profound transformation. And today, two paths lie before her: to continue waiting for the external world to make choices for her, or to begin consciously choosing herself. A woman who no longer needs is not cold, distant, or inaccessible. On the contrary, she is an awakened, deeply conscious, and truly free individual. She is free from begging for attention, free from the need to adapt to environments where her inner essence fades, free from betraying her principles to avoid loneliness. As Carl Jung stated, when a woman finds her inner core, she stops revolving around what does not resonate with her authentic self. And this moment belongs to her now. The world doesn't require her to be perfect. It only needs her to be herself, whole, unwavering, present. And this process begins when she stops experiencing need and starts making conscious choices.